It was we, the people, not we, the white male citizens, nor yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people, who formed the Union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it is downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty, while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this democratic Republican government, the ballot.
When it comes to Americans' women's right for suffrage, no one suffered more for the cause than Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They pioneered the pathway to fight for the rights and civil responsibilities of women. To Anthony and Stanton, it seemed that women had all the responsibilities of a United States citizen, but none of the rights associated with them. The goal was simple, to be recognized as equal to their male counterparts who already had the vote. However, the path to this goal was much more difficult than they had anticipated. To understand why Anthony and Stanton had this goal, we must look to their childhood for answers. Susan B. Anthony, born February 15, 1820, grew up living in a simplistic Quaker home. She was raised with the egalitarian values of the Quaker Society, and having known what it was like to live in a society where men and women were considered equal, she carried these values with her on her travels through life. Although she did have these good experiences, she still encountered the current reality of widespread inequality of women. Wanting to do something more with her life and prove her value as a person, Anthony went on to become a teacher. Sexism still followed Anthony, however, as she received a significantly smaller wage than her male counterparts. 5 years earlier, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born on November 12, 1815, in Johnston, New York, was raised as the daughter of a lawyer. The things she learned from women that would come to her father's office would begin her understanding of the rampant marriage inequalities that women were facing. She experienced the dismissal of women firsthand when her only brother died. While trying to comfort her father, he uttered, "Oh, my daughter, I wish you were a boy." After hearing this, Stanton set out to prove herself. Eventually, Elizabeth met Henry Stanton, who she would come to marry. The Stantons ventured together into the World's Anti-Slavery Convention in London in 1840. Here she would yet again witness the subjugation of women when they were forbidden to take part in the convention, even though they were a large part of many anti-slavery societies. She also met Lucretia Mott, who would go on to be an ally in the fight for suffrage. It was at this time that they planned to hold a women's rights convention when they returned home. The Seneca Falls Convention was the commencement of the American women's rights battle for suffrage. At Seneca Falls, they would write the Declaration of Sentiments, modeling it after the Declaration of Independence at the suggestion of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, as if declaring their independence from men.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled.
This revolutionary document made women's suffrage the women's issue of the time. Once the issue was brought to attention, there could be no reversing the process. A decision had to be made. Were women deserving of equal rights and responsibilities or not? Of course, Stanton felt the answer was yes, and, in Susan B. Anthony, she found a kindred spirit. Anthony and Stanton were introduced to each other by Amelia Bloomer after an anti-slavery meeting at Seneca Falls. It began with the shared cause of temperance, founding the Women's State Temperance Society from 1852 to 1853. Elizabeth Cady Stanton also expressed many radical ideas on marriage and women's rights in speeches, for which she received a lot of ridicule and had to step down. From here they focused on women's suffrage and started the grueling process of petitioning door to door, lecturing and speaking anywhere they could. They fought hard on the issues of education, marriage equality, anti-slavery, and women's property rights. Then came the war. The focus turned mainly on the issue of slavery, and women were forced to back down in the hopes that their help in the war effort would shed light on women's abilities beyond the household. During this time, they formed the National Women's Loyal League and petitioned for African American and women's rights. When the war ended, people began to move towards giving African Americans the vote. Stanton and Anthony thought this was finally the opportunity and time when they could gain what they had been fighting for. The proposal for the 15th Amendment was being debated in Congress. During this time, they would form the American Equal Rights Association and begin petitioning for the vote at the state level. It felt as if the women's suffrage movement was making real progress for the first time, but when the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1869, it said it would protect from anyone being barred from polls on basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Just adding one more word would have given them the vote, but women were denied again. Spurred by her anger, Susan B. Anthony and her allies attempted to vote in the 1872 presidential election. It took over a week before an actual warrant for Anthony's arrest was issued under a provision of the Federal Enforcement Act of 1870. When a polite U.S. Marshal showed up at her door and said Mr. Storrs wanted to see her, she insisted that she be arrested properly. In an attempt to get her case to the Supreme Court, she decided that she would refuse to post bail on her imprisonment and ask for a writ of the habeas corpus. When the time of her trial came around, the case was instead passed to a circuit court, presided over by a justice of the Supreme Court, Ward Hunt. Anthony wasn't even allowed to testify. At the conclusion of the case, Judge Hunt did not allow the jury to decide on the verdict and instead announced his opinion that Anthony did not have the right to vote under any of the amendments and was guilty of violating the law, directing the jury to find her guilty. Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced?
I have many things to say. For in your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights are all alike ignored. Robbed of the fundamental privilege of citizenship, I am degraded from the status of a citizen to that of a subject. And not only myself individually, but all of my sex are, by your honor's verdict, doomed to political subjugation under this so-called form of government. Your denial of my citizen's right to vote is the denial of my right of consent as one of the governed, the denial of my right of representation as one of the taxed, the denial of my right to a trial by a jury of my peers as an offender against the law.
Court must insist the prisoner has been tried according to the established forms of law.
But by forms of law all made by men, interpreted by men, administered by men, and in favor of men, and against women. Now, must women, to get their right to a voice in this government, take it, and I have taken mine, and mean to take it at every possible opportunity.
The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the costs of prosecution.
I shall never pay a dollar of your unjust penalty. All the stock in trade I possess is a $10,000 debt, incurred by publishing my paper, The Revolution, 4 years ago, the sole object of which was to educate all women to do precisely as I have done, rebel against your man-made, unjust, unconstitutional forms of law that tax, fine, imprison, and hang women while they deny them the right of representation in the government. And I shall earnestly and persistently continue to urge all women to the practical recognition of the old revolutionary maxim that resistance to tyranny is obedience to God.
In 1876, Stanton and Anthony, along with their suffragist friend Matilda Joslyn Gage, would write a Declaration of Rights for Women, calling for an impeachment of the government because of its inability to support the broad principles of human rights proclaimed in 1776. They would spread this message at a centennial 4th of July celebration in Independence Hall. Determined to be heard, the women took stage by force. On the way to the stage, the women handed out copies of the Declaration of the Rights of Women to outreaching hands. Leading the way was Susan B. Anthony. They proposed the 16th Amendment to Congress in 1878, which, if passed, would grant women the right to vote. The amendment was defeated in Congress in 1887. They had also been working extremely hard on petitioning for women's suffrage on the state levels. By 1900, 4 states had given women the right to vote. In 1902, Elizabeth Cady Stanton would pass away, and so would Susan B. Anthony in 1906, and they would sadly not get to witness the full results of their hard work. Finally, though in 1920, they were triumphant. Women gained the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. After decades of war, after arguing, fighting, speaking, standing up, and sitting down, the entirety of the governed obtained legislation that granted them the consent in the government that had been promised to all 144 years previous.